Alright guys, so in this video we're actually going to do examples of finding the period and the amplitude. The midline is going to come up, but again the midline is just that plus or minus number at the end. So the amplitude and the period is a little bit trickier sometimes. So whenever it's sine or cosine, the number in front is the amplitude. And in order to find the period, we're always going to have to use a little formula. It's related to the number that's in front of the theta or the x. So the period is going to be 2 pi over b. But we can also sometimes use the formula b equals 2 pi over the period. Like if we know what the period is and we're trying to figure out what the equation looks like. So we can go back and forth by basically just doing 2 pi divided by whatever we have. A couple of things to remember, that the pi symbol, we're probably never going to actually type that into the calculator. It might cancel. There might be a pi in the denominator that cancels. And we might have to do like keep, change, flip whenever we're working this out. So just keep that in mind as we're doing some of these examples. Another thing that's going to help us is if we remember what the original graph looks like. Sine originally looks like this. It started at the origin. It goes up, middle, down, middle. Cosine starts at the top. Cosine goes top, middle, down, middle, top. All right, so in number 1, it's a sine function. The number in front is the amplitude. So the amplitude of this function is 3, which means from the middle, it will go up 3 and down 3. Remember, this distance in here is the amplitude. Same thing for cosine. From the maximum or the minimum to the middle is the amplitude. All right, this period of this function, the b is 2, so I always have to do 2 pi over b. So 2 pi over 2, if I simplify that, my period is pi. So basically what this graph will look like, and I'm just going to sketch it really quickly here. It's a sine graph, so we'll start in the middle. It'll go up, down, back to the middle again. But this will be 3 and this will be -3 because that's my amplitude. And this will be pi instead of being 2 pi. All right, so the next one, here's my equation. Again, it's sine. My amplitude is just the number in front. So 3 over 2 is my amplitude, which is 1.5. The period, I'm going to have to do 2 pi over b. My b is 1/3. So here's where I was saying we might have to do keep, change, flip. I'm going to rewrite it so that it's 2 pi divided by 1/3. And you can type this in the calculator if you want. Just don't push the pi symbol. Just do 2 divided by 1/3 and see what you get. But I'm going to keep, change that to a multiply problem and flip this. So 2 times 3 is 6 over 1. I mean, when 1 is in the denominator, that just becomes the same thing. So if in the calculator you did 2 divided by 1/3, you would get 6, which means 6 pi. So this is going to be super stretched out. This one is kind of more condensed. Basically what this one means, if here's 1 pi and here's 2 pi, basically this means you're going to see 2 of the graph by the time you get to 2 pi. So that's going to look a lot more condensed together because the period is shorter, so you're going to see more of them. But 6 pi, this is getting super stretched out. So that means here's normal 2 pi. Normally sine is from the middle, it's all the way up, all the way down, and done by the time I get to 2 pi. What this means is I'm not going to be done with the graph until I get to 6 pi. So that's going to be super stretched out. So 3 pi would be the middle. So this is going to be super stretched out. If you had a graph that went up to 2 pi, that's all that you would be able to see of that whole entire graph because it got stretched out all the way to 6 pi. All right, so we're just going to do the rest of them the same way. So for number 3, what's the amplitude? The amplitude is 4 because that's the number in front. The period, we're always going to do 2 pi over b. So what is the number that's in front of the theta? 1. So 2 pi over 1 is just 2 pi. So basically this is going to look the same way that my sine graph looked, except it's going to go up to 4 and down to -4. And by the time I'm done, it'll be at 2 pi. So because it's sine, it starts at 0, 0. But this time it's going to go up to 4 and down to -4. And be done by the time I get to 2 pi. All right, number 4, what's the amplitude? Amplitude is the number in front. The number in front is 1. Period. 2 pi over 1/2. So if in the calculator I do 2 divided by 1/2, or if I do keep, change, flip, that's going to equal 4. So 4 pi. So this is going to be stretched out. So what that means is I'm only going to be able to see half of the graph because my graph goes up to 2 pi, but the pattern ends at 4 pi. So that means I'm only going to be able to see half. So this is what cosine looks like always. It starts at the top, middle, down, middle, back to the top. And since this is where 4 pi is this time, but my graph only goes up to 2 pi, so I'm only going to be able to see half of it. So I'm only going to be able to see the top, the middle, and then back down. Since my amplitude is 1, it starts at the top, and then middle, down to -1. That's all I'm going to be able to see. And I can backtrack it. Everything is kind of symmetric and evenly spaced. All right, so try number 5. What do you think the amplitude and what do you think the period is? So my amplitude is 1/2. My period is just going to have to stay 2 pi over 3. And I'm not even going to honestly mess with graphing this one because that's not going to be even for the graph that they gave me. But you can open up Desmos and you can graph it in Desmos so that you can look at it. All right, number 6, what do you think the amplitude is going to be? Yep, hopefully you said 5 because that's the number in front. And the period? 2 pi over 1/3. So keep, change, flip, or just in the calculator, do 2 divided by 1/3, and you're going to wind up with 6 pi. So again, I'm not really going to mess with this one too much because I'm barely going to be able to see any of it. What's important that you understand is If my graph is only going up to 2 pi, but my pattern goes to 6 pi, I'm not going to be able to see that whole thing. My graph is getting cut off. All right, pause the video here and try numbers 7, 8, 9, and 10. And you don't have to worry about sketching the graph, just find the amplitude and the period. All right, there's the answers. And again, I'm not going to worry too much about the graph. All right, so these have to do with actually figuring out the midline. So the first thing I do is figure out where the middle of the graph is. And so for me, it's kind of easy to tell that the middle of the graph is here at 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Count down and count up and make sure that that is the same number. That's how you can tell it's the middle. So since that's 3, that is my amplitude. Since my middle of the graph is here at 3, that's my midline. Y equals 3. It's important that you write it as y equals. And then to figure out the period of the graph, I'm going to look in between two of my maximums. So from 0 to pi, so that means my period is pi. So when I'm going to write the equation, I'm going to notice that this is cosine, because if I look at my y-axis, that's a maximum. That's how cosine starts, with the maximum. So it's going to be cosine. My period, let's do that last. Let's do the amplitude first. So my amplitude is 3, so that's the number that goes in front. My midline is up 3, so that means my equation is going to have a plus 3 at the end. And I'm going to have to do a little work to put that number in front of theta. I'm going to have to figure out 2 pi over, in this case I have my period. So 2 pi over pi is going to just equal 2. That's what goes in front of the theta. So that's my equation. Oops, sorry. That's my equation. All right, the next one, again, I always start by figuring out my midline. So here's my midline. And I can tell, or I can check it by counting up. 1, 2, 3, 4, counting down. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's my amplitude. My amplitude is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because my midline is down at -1, my midline is y equals -1. And now I'm going to figure out my period. So I'm going to go from minimum to minimum in this case just because I feel like it. So from -2 to +6, again, you can always subtract them in the calculator. -2 minus 6 is 8. Distance is always positive, so I'm going to just make it positive 8 pi. So I can tell that this is sine because if I look at my y-axis, it's going through the middle. Cosine would be a maximum or a minimum on the y-axis. So I can tell that this is sine. So I'm going to put a 4 in front because that's my amplitude. I'm going to put -1 at the end because that's my midline. And for the b value, I'm going to do 2 pi over 8 pi. And the pi's cancel out. 2 over 8 reduces to 1 over 4. So that's the number that goes in front. All right, I'm going to assign you a Delta Math so that you will have some other